Okay?
Okay.
All right. Baruch Hashem. Last week we weren't here for a Shia, but we were in Uman. So that was good. It's a good, it was a good exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
This week is Parshat Masei. Masei records all the travels. The Jews, where they encamped in the desert, 40 years they were in the desert, they encamped 42 times. That's what the Parsha starts off with. 42 times they camped in different places. They went from one place to the next, one place to the next. Rashi explains there a very interesting thing. 14 of the encampments of their moving was the first year that they left Egypt, until they finished the Mishkan. That leaves 28. There were 8 travels from the time Aaron passed away, which is in this week's Parsha, until they got to the border of Eretz Israel. So that leaves 20. So in the 40 years they were in the desert, they only moved around 20 times. They only moved around 20 times. It's because Hashem is not looking to make life miserable for people. Very simply put. He said, don't think that they had to go here, you had to go there, 40 years, you're going to go through the desert. What? It's a person's life that way. A person's life is that way. That, we have our travels, we have our difficult moments, and we have our challenges, and we have our times of rest too, right? Problem is that we always have a tendency to think of the problems that we have, not the good moments. That's the problem. So Reb Nosson writes, starts off the Parsha, Ele Masei B'nai Yisrael. These are the travels of the Jewish nation. Right? Vayichtov Moshe es motzoehem. Moshe recorded their travels, umaseihem, when they left and when they encamped and when they left. He recorded everything. And Reb Nosson writes, take a look. What'd they do? They picked themselves up from Egypt with all their bags and all their possessions, whatever they could, and they went out into the desert. But that became part of the Torah. That became part of the Torah. Reb Nosson is telling you that every part of your life, a trip, right, may not be comfortable, may not want to do it even, but you got to do it. But that could become part of Torah. If you live your life according to Torah, then anything that happens in your life also becomes part of the Torah. It's written down in the Torah. It's recorded 42 times, 42 stops, right? So this is the idea behind it. You have to realize and recognize is even more important, that everything you do has sanctity to it. Everything you do could make or break a person, and it's up to you to make it sanctity. It's up to you to make it. Mama, you can make a part of Torah out of your travels. For example, last week we left Israel 2 hours late, but we left at 5:30 in the afternoon. We came back about 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Okay? 40 hours we spent on that trip.
Wow.
From the time we left until the time we came back. 13 hours were our goal. That's what we spent in Uman. But 27 hours were spent on the road, either in the plane or in the airports or on the buses, right? 27, 2/3 of the trip was spent on travel, but 1/3 was spent with Hashem. But all 40 hours are all counted as having been spent with Hashem. Right? That's what we have to learn from that. Okay. The Parsha starts off, Eila Masei B'nai Yisrael. These are the travels of the Jewish nation. These, Eila, these. The Medrash says the fact that it says Eila is meant to tell us that the travels brought about forgiveness for the golden calf. Because by the golden calf it says, Eila Elokecha Yisrael. This is your God. Right? This, Eila. So the Torah uses the word Eila to teach us that you can forgive. Hashem will forgive us even for the worst sin, for idolatry, the golden calf. Eila, Rabbi Nachman teaches from here that Eila Masei, when you travel, you can bring about a rectification and forgiveness for any kind of sin, the avodah zarah, the idolatries, because a trip means that you're doing it because of faith. You're doing the trip because of faith. And if you believe in Hashem, you believe in the Torah, you believe that Hashem runs the world, I have to make this trip, whatever, I have to make it. But it's meant for me to strengthen my faith in Hashem, and that way I can get forgiveness for any other thing I've done, Eila Elokecha Yisrael, anything that's done for the idolatries or for something that's not right, I can have that forgiven too. That's the power of a trip. It just depends how you go about it. And there's a lot of things that happen. For instance, Reb Nosson explains that when you travel, where are your thoughts? Basically on the trip, right? Thinking, I have to go here, I have to travel here, whatnot. During the course of that trip, your mind is focused on a lot of different things that if you were home, it would not be focused on, right? Which means that you're now changing your focus to see where I can find Hashem in this situation, find Hashem in that situation. That's what's happening when I travel. I bring out the desires, the yearnings, the longings that I have for Hashem. I bring them out in different ways on the trip. We had an 8-hour bus ride. We landed in Iasi, Romania. That's where we landed. Mm-hmm. And then we had to cross to the Moldovan border. And then we went through Moldova. Then we had to cross into the Ukrainian border, right? And then it still took us 8 hours to cross from Iasi. It doesn't take that long, but because of all the border crossings, all the time and all that, okay, so we have that. So our focus, we're thinking about the road, what we're doing here, what's happening when you strengthen your emunah in Hashem. You are rectifying all the lost souls that are embedded in those areas in the world in order to be able to rectify and elevate them to Hashem, right? I'll give you an example. My Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Chaim Rosen Zechron Levrochim, was in Toronto. This is about 1953. He's in Toronto. There was somebody there named Avram Yakubovich, who was a born Torontonian, was born there, and he knew the city very well. And in the city, there was like a forest, like a kind of a central park that was in the middle of the city. It was a forest, in the middle of Toronto, between north and south. So he was taking my Rosh Yeshiva around to different donors, try and raise money for the yeshiva. And they went into the forest, and he had been there who knows how many times. He had passed through that forest, and he got lost. It's a forest that cuts north to south. It's a forest that you know your way around. You've been there before. You've been on all the, and he got lost. And he went around for a couple of hours. Hours they were looking. He just couldn't understand it. How not? Finally, my Rosh Yeshiva said, "Excuse me, but I have to go to the bathroom." So he got out of the car. He went to the bathroom, came back, washed his hands, and made the bracha Asher Yotza. And right after that, they found the exit to the forest. Why? Because there are souls that are dispersed throughout the world from the time of Adam, and they need to have a bracha or some positive thought or some good thought of Torah or whatever accompany them. And that way they get elevated from where they're stuck. And this is what happened. Right? Amazing, huh? But that's what happens when you travel. So the 42 travels, the 42 encampments that the Jews did, right? What they did was they elevated a lot of these sparks that were there from the time of Adam until their time. They were able to elevate them during their travels throughout the desert. And the Zohar says that that time they trod upon all the klipos, all the forces of evil that were in the desert. A desert is not a place where people live, right? It's a place for the forces of evil. That's what they are. And by going through the desert, they were able to oppose and subdue the forces of evil that were there. And that's why they spent 40 years in the desert. It's one of the reasons. They spent it there. They were able to subdue these klipos, these forces of evil, in order to be able to, people should be able to come recognize Hashem. And that's what happens whenever any of us make a trip. Rabbi Nachman said, if a person has a trip laid out before him, he shouldn't fight the trip. You don't want to go. I don't want to go. No. If a trip presents itself, take the trip. Because wherever a Jew goes, he does a mitzvah. He gives some tzedakah. He says a bracha. He davens, puts on talis and tefillin, whatever it may be. Right? You're doing something good. You're making a tikkun. Wherever you go, you're making a rectification. So don't fight the trip as if, I can't go, I don't want to go, I'm not going to go. No. You have a trip, if it comes, take it. Because you'll be able to do rectifications there that you won't be able to do from your home. So that's one of the very important lessons that we learned from the beginning of the Parsha, which talks about the Masei, the travels of the Am Yisrael. Okay. The next part of the trip, the next part of the Parsha talks about the borders of eretz Israel. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that Reb Nosson writes that in the Parshiyos from Shavuos B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av, each one of the Parshiyos talk about inheriting eretz Israel. And it's to teach us that even in a time when we feel we're kicked out of the land, in a time we're in exile, in a time where it looks like our worst moments, never forget that Hashem promised to give us eretz Israel, and that we will merit to come back to it. As we see happening now in our day, we see the Jews are coming back to eretz Israel, Baruch Hashem. So the Torah talks about the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Now, there's a number of things about that. One Rashi brings, he says that there are laws that apply in Eretz Yisrael that don't apply outside. For example, this year is a Shemitah year, or the laws of tithes, truma, and meiser, right? You have to give it from the fruit of the land, not from the fruit outside the land. So if it grows in Japan or it grows in Europe or South America, it doesn't matter, right? There's no truma or meiser from there. But in Eretz Yisrael, you have to take off. So you have to know what's called Eretz Yisrael. So the Torah lists the borders from the southern part of the Dead Sea till the Mediterranean on a diagonal kind of a line, not exactly diagonal, but it's there. You have the border is the western border is the Mediterranean Sea. The northern borders are the area of Lebanon going over into Syria, and then it goes down, follows the river Jordan down to the Dead Sea. The borders are clearly delineated. This is the land of Israel. Any area inside there is what's called Kodesh. It's holy, right? The Mishnah in Kalim starts off, there are 10 levels of sanctity in Eretz Yisrael. The first level is the land itself. Wherever you are in Eretz Yisrael, it's Kodesh, it's sanctified, right? My father-in-law, Hashem, used to say, every stone, every pebble, every blade of grass in Eretz Yisrael has sanctity to it. Every tree, everything that you see is all holy, right? And you're attaching yourself to the holiness of Eretz Yisrael. That's an amazing thing. That we, who are we? You know, what levels are we on and whatnot? And we can attach ourselves to this tremendous kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. It's an amazing thing. So that's one thing to know about it. Rashi says everything, this is all part of Eretz Yisrael. Right? The next level now comes up to the city of Yerushalayim. And then within Yerushalayim, there are different levels. And then you get to the Temple Mount, and there are different levels of sanctity on the Temple Mount itself, till you've come to the Holy of Holies, which is the center of the temple. Whatever the case is, the point is that every part of the land has sanctity. So that if I go to Yam HaMelech, or if I go to the Tveria, to the Yam Kinneret, or if I go to Meron, or if I go to Nitzani Oz, or I go to any other place in Eretz Yisrael, it's all holy. And I can gain from the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman has a lesson, it says, by the spies, Parshat Shlach. It says there a verse, Eretz Ocheles Yoshveho. The spy said that the land devours its inhabitants. Right? What happened? At that time, Hashem made a lot of people die when the spies were touring Israel. Right? People were dying, and it was meant to keep the people busy so they shouldn't bother with the spies. Right? Instead, the spies turned it into slander against the Holy Land, and they said it's a land that devours its inhabitants. Right? Rabbi Nachman says, what does it mean it devours its inhabitants? He says, if you merit, when you're in Eretz Yisrael, to recognize the sanctity of the land, to believe in it, at least if you don't recognize it, at least believe in it, then the land will devour you, which means you will now become part of Eretz Yisrael, just like you devour an ice cream or a piece of bread or a piece of meat. It becomes part of you. So too, the land will absorb you and turn you into a holy vessel. Isn't that amazing?
It's incredible.
That's amazing. But that's what it is. It's a question that the person has the ability to be turned into the sanctity of eretz Yisrael. And that's a very important lesson. So the Torah tells us the borders of eretz Yisrael to tell us that if you're here, you have an opportunity. Take advantage of the opportunity. Not everyone does. All right? So we have to take advantage of the opportunity. The next thing, the next part of the Parsha speaks about the presidents of the tribes. It names them. And these are the presidents who, when you cross the border, these are the people that will help you inherit your portion of the land. Whatever is due to Shevet Yehuda, or Shevet Yisachar, or Shevet Gad, or Shevet Naphtali, or whatever, right? These are the people. Why is that? Because Rabbi Nachman says elsewhere, it's in Zoya also, it's called Eretz Yisrael, land of Israel. What does it mean, the land of Israel? It means it's the land which is a lower level that receives from Israel, from Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov is really the man, Hashem, when he had his dream of the ladder and everything, it says Hashem folded over all of Eretz Yisrael and put it under him, because he was the boss of Eretz Yisrael. He is the Baalim, the owner, belongs to Yaakov. And Yaakov then transfers his Kedusha, his holiness, to the land. The land is holy because it's Eretz Yisrael. It receives from Yaakov Avinu, who's called Yisrael. So it teaches us that as much as we want the land, we can't get it. Excuse me. We can't get it without the sanctity of our leaders, of our true leaders, of those presidents of the tribes who were able, who had the koyach to be able to divide the land and give it out to the people as they could best do according to the tzaddikim, in order to learn to appreciate what Eretz Yisrael is like. Without that, it's going to be too difficult. So that's another part of the Parsha. The next part of the Parsha, well, let me backtrack. After describing the 42 encampments, there's a few psukim. Hashem says, okay, you're about to cross over the Jordan River, right? And Rashi brings there that your mind should be focused on listening to Hashem and following the word of Hashem, because if you don't, then those nations that are there in the land will become like sticks in your eyes and they will harm you, right? It was said after the Six-Day War in 1967, the Jews finally conquered the land of Israel, right? So they conquered it. But there were some people who were not worthy leaders, and they said to the Arabs who had left, come back, we're going to live together, right? They brought them back to the land. And it says, if you bring them back, they'll be thorns in your side. And this is what we have today, right? They don't contribute anything to the growth of the land. And if you have any questions about that, take a look for the last 200 years when they were living here, before the Jews came. The land was a very shallow land. There was very little here, very little to support the people. Now, all of a sudden, the Jews came, the land is giving forth fruit. It's giving, what happened, right? Because they can't produce. Those Arabs that are here cannot produce. They don't produce. All they are thorns in our side, right? If they were human beings, okay, but they don't act that way. Okay, let's not get too carried away with this. Anyway, back to the Parsha. So the presidents of the tribes give out the land. They're the ones we have to look forward to. Look for true leaders, leaders who really mean the benefit of the country, the benefit of the people, not the benefit of themselves, right? So there's a lot to say about that now. We had now just the prime minister. He was there for a year, and he abdicated his throne, right? He had a lot of scandals, right? He switched his own ideology and everything like that. But he did take, in the meantime, 50 million shekels to rebuild his house in Ra'anana so he can have a nice house. 50 million shekels of the people's being a prime minister for 1 year. That's what it entitles you to, right? In other words, our problem is we have leaders who don't think of the country, who don't think of the people, who think of themselves. The Torah appointed these 12 people to be the leaders of the tribes in order, because Hashem knew that these people will work for the people. These presidents will work for the people. They will be subservient to the people. They will do whatever is in the people's interest, not what's in their own interest. So that's something very important. We have to look for such people to be our leaders. The next part of the Parsha talks about cities that are in the land of Israel. One of the laws is that you have a city, you have to leave 2,000 amos, 2,000 ells outside the city limits. 1,000 is open. People can go out for a spell of air, nice, free, beautiful vegetation, whatever the case is. And 1,000 of these ells is used for planting, for vegetation, for vegetables, for trees, whatever you need. But every city should have something like that. You need to have these 2,000 ells. It's called 2,000 amos. That's what it's called. Amma is called an el. All right, Reb Nosson has a lesson. He says, what are these 2,000 ells, right? There are two olives, two lessons that begin with an aleph in Rabbi Nachman's Likutei Moharan. One is called Azamra, an aleph, I will sing. The other is called Aye, Hashem, where are you? Right? These 2,000 amos represent these two lessons. He says, one, you have to look for the good, for the benefit, find out, people have growth, they have vegetation, they have trees. Azamra, we find the good and we develop and nurture the good that's within us. The other one, Aye, you have to have an open space to breathe. Hashem, where are you? Where are you? Aye, Aye, where are you in my life? Where? These are the two amos, 2,000 amos down. Okay. We have the next part of the Parsha. It speaks about the 6 refuge cities, cities of refuge. Should a person accidentally kill somebody else, he has to go into exile. Punishment of the murder is exile. And you have to go to any one of these 6 cities, and you have to live there until the Kohen Gadol passes away in your lifetime. And then you can leave the city, right? If a person murders deliberately, it doesn't help you. You can go into the city and kill the guy on the spot. He's a murderer. You're a murderer, you don't let live to murder other people. Not like they have today, have mercy on the guy, they have all these things that go on in judge. Have mercy on the guy. He only killed somebody. What's wrong with that, right? And then, these kids, they go into the schools, they kill, kids they had recently in Texas, they had in Denver, they had all over, right? It's incredible. Live the guy. Not only do you let him live, you put him in jail for life. He's 18 years old. He's going to live till he's 80, whatever. Okay? So that's 60 years that the guy is living off public money. I, as a taxpayer, I'm giving him food every single day, right? And I have to pay for the guards and the upkeep of the prison because he's a murderer. Does that make sense? No. Okay. But the Torah speaks about someone who murdered accidentally. Manslaughter, it's called. It's accidental. A guy is driving a car and a pedestrian passes in front of him. He runs him over, he kills him. It's accidental. It's manslaughter. You can't call the guy a killer. Certainly there was no intention to do that. So you have to find help for him. You have to be able to put him in a city of refuge. And he has to be able to live there, which means he has to be able to earn a living, he has to be able to work and whatnot. It's rehabilitation. That's what everyone claims you have to have with all the criminals. So now, this is life on this world, on this planet. You have a guy named Putin today who just killed 50,000 of his soldiers in a war that makes no sense. And the Ukrainians lost a similar amount of people, right? Murder. Right, I'm going to go out to kill you. Nothing happened with this war except that Russia destroyed a lot of cities. They destroyed literally destroyed cities and people's lives, but there was no gain. What did they gain out of this? This is murder. We live in such a world. We live in such a world where there's this senseless spilling of blood. People all over. We have it here in Israel. We have the Arabs. They just last week, an Arab took a screwdriver and pushed it in somebody's neck on a bus in Bnei Brak to kill him. Right? Senseless. What for? What'd you gain out of it? Anyway, the idea behind it is that murder exists. It was an Agatha Christie book, Murder, She Wrote, right? Murder exists, right? The question is, what do we do about it? What can we do about it? That's the question, right? It happens all the time. Most of it is probably incidental, or it's non-deliberate. Nobody's looking really at a real murder. Not many people do that, right? The idea behind it is that there is an attribute of anger. Do you ever say, I'm going to murder him? Do you ever use that expression? All right, I'll murder him or something. It's anger. The lesson that we have to learn from this whole talk about murder is how to reduce anger. Today they call it anger management. You've got to be able to manage it. It's not easy. It's a trait, a character trait that's born with people. Take a look at a toddler, right? A kid, an infant, a year old. They start screaming and yelling something, whatever. It hurts them, for whatever reason it may be. But the anger is there, right? They want to get rid of it. Take the terrible tools, they call it, with the kids, or the 3-year-olds. You ever see a kid throw a temper tantrum in a supermarket, right? Imagine what the poor mother's going through, trying to buy her groceries and the kid is throwing a tantrum, right? The idea is we have to control our anger. We have to take our anger and we have to learn to channel it into compassion. That's what Rabbi Nachman teaches. There's energy behind that anger. There's a lot of energy, and it could be turned positive by turning it into compassion, learning what to do with the anger so that that murderous trait within us turns into a positive trait, turns into something good. But how can we do that? We can do it with faith, by strengthening our faith in Hashem. The Zohar says that which are the 6 cities of refuge that are applicable and available to every Jew every day. What are those 6? It's called Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. 6 words. It's our proclamation of faith in Hashem. That proclamation of faith is what could save us from the worst things in the world. We have to strengthen our faith in Hashem and always work on strengthening our emunah so that we're able to come closer to Hashem. And with that, we'll be able to overcome the murderous traits that are in us. Right? This is what we have from the Parsha. And the end part of the Parsha is that the daughters of Zlatan, when a woman marries, right, her husband, her property becomes part of her family. Her family is her husband and her children. And if she marries out, she marries into another tribe, so that property from her tribe goes over to the other tribe. So the daughters of Zlatan, there were 5 daughters, they were told to marry within the tribe. It's a law that applied only in that generation. Afterwards, you can marry wherever, right? It's crossbreeding between Yehuda and Naphtali and Yisachar and Dan and all the others. But what it means is that there are times you have to watch out for your own self too. You have to be careful, watch yourself, don't be loose with your possessions, don't make it light that something you have go over to somebody else or whatnot. Be careful with what you have. It's Hashem's blessing to you. If you have that blessing, keep it, nurture it, and be proud of it, and Hashem will help you that you'll see a lot of nachas and simchas from it. May Hashem help that this week we have Friday, we have Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av, the beginning of the 9 days, where we would lead up to Tisha B'Av, the day of the destruction of the temple. Right, we're in the throes of those weeks, of these weeks, but Hashem is promising us that the land is ours, and we will get to what is ours, right? Don't be free to give away eretz Israel to somebody else. A 2-state solution, no problem. There's plenty of room in Saudi Arabia. There's plenty of room in Nairobi. There's plenty of room for the Palestinians to make a state of their own there. They don't have to take it in the state of Israel. It's not theirs. So Hashem should help. We should merit to see the coming of Mashiach, where the divine right of the Jews to eretz Israel will be open for all to see, and we'll see the coming of Mashiach, a time of peace and prosperity for Am Yisrael. Amen. Amen.